What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video on the channel. Today, I'm going to be doing something a little different. If you don't remember, I dropped my QB tier list just a couple weeks ago on the channel, and the top comment was suggesting we do a running back tier list. So shout out to whoever left that comment, and you're going to get it today in this video. We're going to pull up the tier list. It's going to look very similar to last time. If you haven't seen it, it is what is that? 5 tiers. Yep, we got 5 tiers, and then we have the running back from every single starting running back in the league right now. I know there are a lot of teams where, there's rotational guys and there's these weird situations. So I did the best I can. If I threw the wrong running back in here, let me know in the comments. I try my best on this one, but let's get straight into it. I mean, 32 teams, we got 32 backs. We got the workhorses, the everyday studs, the rotational guys, and then the replaceable guys. So it's going to get interesting. These tiers are in order. So, this is, I guess, worst to best if you want to hear my official rankings. First, I'm going to start with Cam Akers. I mean, we're going into this season with a weird Rams offense. Matthew Stafford coming back from injury. Still have one of the best receivers in the whole league with Cooper Kupp, but the running back room is not figured out at all. Cam Akers got benched really early last year. He was kind of a non-factor, but based on the room they put together this year, it looks like he's going to be starting again. I don't hate Cam Akers as much as I know some people do. I'm not, his biggest hater or anything like that. I think he could be all right, but by definition, he's very replaceable. He was replaced last year. I'm interested to see if they have faith in another guy, later down the depth chart that I might not be thinking of. But with Cam Akers in the one spot, this Rams team doesn't really have a great running game. They don't have an offensive line that can block for a great running game. We're way past the days of Todd Gurley being in the MVP conversation. So this whole Rams team, maybe I'll be able to talk about it more in depth in a future video, but they have a weird trajectory, and the running back room is a huge part of why it's so weird. Next up, we're going to go to another team that I think is one of the best teams in the league, maybe not in the same position as the Rams. Let's talk about James Cook from the Buffalo Bills. I have no problems with James Cook. I thought he was incredible at Georgia. He has some really good moments. I think he could flash, but I honestly prefer Devin Singletary for what the Bills were going to do. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that. I know a lot of people want them to draft Bijan Robinson or, based on the value we saw, maybe even Jahmyr Gibbs. But I don't love sticking with James Cook. I understand he's used to the system. He offers more of a receiving threat than Devin Singletary did, but I don't trust his pass blocking, which is a really bad trait if you're on a team with Josh Allen. So I worry about the scheme fit there. I think he's electric. I think he'll have his moments, but I really think they should go a different direction with the running back spot if they're going to keep their offense as is. Especially, as I'm recording, DeAndre Hopkins is a free agent. If they go after a guy like him, they might pass every play. You got to get a different type of back for situations like that. Next up, let's talk about, kind of a one-dimensional back. If I can find him here. He's been switching teams a lot lately, so he's not in the same jersey he would be in. But we have Raheem Mostert. Raheem Mostert, obviously, you guys know him for being one of the fastest guys in the league. May have taken a step back in that regard, but that comes with age, especially for running backs. But I don't think he's going to do too much for Miami. I know that might be a tough take because he's a fan favorite. And if we're talking how much I like these guys, I love Raheem Mostert, but I just don't think he offers a ton in that running game. This offseason, I expected them to go after a little bit more at the running back position, whether maybe they were a team that took Jahmyr Gibbs, which I had mocked in the past before, early second round type stuff. But Raheem Mostert just doesn't do it for me. There's so many question marks with Tua Tagovailoa, and I know they bring him in originally because they love speed over there. Mike McDaniel coached this guy offensive coordinator-wise in San Francisco, and we've seen what the team he's built up in Miami. He loves speed. He loves Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Mostert was supposed to be another one of those super fast guys, but now that he's taken a bit of a step back in the speed regard, I don't think he offers a whole lot more as a back. So, there are good things about him, but I just don't think he's a guy that's more than replaceable at this point. Next up, we're going to talk about a guy in the thumbnail of this video, which, spoils it right away. It's Isaiah Pacheco. I don't hate Isaiah Pacheco either. A great story. 7th round guy out of Rutgers is a Super Bowl champ starting running back. He took over for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire proves why I don't like this guy. The Chiefs invested a lot more in Edwards-Helaire. They took a first-round pick for him, and they were willing to get rid of him after one season. And Edwards-Helaire had a great first year, and him combined with McKinnon looked like it was going to be a duo for the future. And I think we might be seeing similar stuff from Pacheco. I don't think he's going to be bad this year, like how Clyde Edwards-Helaire was last year, but I also don't think he's going to be that good. The Chiefs, a team like the Bills, really pass heavy. That's how it is when you have Mahomes. And Pacheco is just a good receiving back. When it comes to his running game, I think he's very one-dimensional. I don't think he is a very talented runner at all at this point. But, I think with the Chiefs offensive line, a great team around him, I think he can develop. So, although he's replaceable, I expect a little more out of him in the future than some of these guys. I'm also rooting for him. I mean, shout out Rutgers, roll Scarlet Knights. Next up, we're going to talk about the Bears. And the Bears are weird. I have Dante Foreman here, but I know it could be Khalil Herbert. I know some people would prefer that. Either way, I think the spot is fair. Those two running backs offer completely different things, which I think actually could boost them a little bit higher as a duo. But if we're talking about either running back individually, they fit in this hole. Foreman, he is a fun downhill runner. I really liked him in Carolina last year, filling in for CMC once he got traded. Talk about CMC later, another guy on the thumbnail. But as a running back himself, he doesn't offer any, he doesn't offer great receiving, which I mean, it could develop. We saw flashes of it. Same with the pass blocking. He's just kind of a downhill in between the holes running back. He kind of, he's like a mini Derrick Henry, but not enough where I'm super impressed. And Khalil Herbert's quite the opposite. Very fast, get to the outside guy. I know he was nice on special teams in the past. He was a guy like Tariq Cohen. The Bears like these smaller guys that can just, burst with speed. And I respect both of them, but I think either of them are replaceable. Obviously, Carolina is jolting their rebuild. They moved it, or I'm sorry, we're talking about Chicago right now. I'm so used to Foreman being on Carolina. Chicago is another team that is boosting their rebuild. They're trying to check off boxes in other categories before they attack a great running back. They moved on from David Montgomery. They didn't elect to pay him, which I understand. But I really think we're in an interesting spot right now with this team, I think is the best way to put it. So maybe this running back room looks a lot different towards the end of the year. Maybe they get a good signing. A younger guy appears from the rotation. But as of right now, I'm not a huge fan. Next guy is a guy I am a fan of. Shout out Brian Robinson. I mean, last year was incredible. Obviously, he unfortunately got shot in the leg, but then came back mid-season and started off really well in Washington. I just don't see it being a thing that consistently. I don't expect Brian Robinson to have consistent great years in the future. I think he's definitely a replaceable back. He's a fun, talented, and like a fan favorite back. But I just think talent wise, I don't want to dig too deep into this because I don't want to dig on the guy. I think he has a lot of room to improve, and I would love to see him improve. But he's just kind of not up there with some of these other guys. As you guys know, running back is the most easily replaceable position. That's why we're seeing so many guys in the replaceable tier. And we have so much new talent that comes in every year. There's going to be plenty of great running backs that have an impact this year that, I might not even have heard of. They definitely won't be talked about in the video. So maybe they have another plan outside of Brian Robinson. I hope he contributes to this Washington team that I think is actually going to be all right. But I just don't think I can put him much higher, especially when the next guy I'm talking about is a guy I really have liked in the past, and that's Javonte Williams. I mean, wow. Javonte Williams was a guy I had really high hopes for, and I think he can achieve them, but he's coming off an injury. He's not going to be ready by week 1. If he is, I'm scared they might have rushed him. So this could be Samaje Perine here, which would be a similar spot. Javonte Williams was amazing at UNC. He was so fun. He's got all the tools in his pocket to build a great running back. It's just he hasn't put it together yet, and it's because of the injuries. I truly think if he was healthy all these years, he would be much higher on this tier list. I'm talking about like maybe up here somewhere, but he just hasn't done it yet. And with running backs, injury is the biggest killer, even compared to any other positions. The one where you want to be hurt the least, it really screws up your whole career path. And I'm worried Javonte Williams won't be able to come back from this. I hope he does. Great player, but as of right now, he's just replaceable. And at the start of the season, that's going to be proven when he's not playing. Next up is the last guy in this replaceable tier. I hate having so many guys down here, but, NFL running backs, they're hard to come by sometimes. There's a lot of them, but there's not a lot of elite ones. And this guy had a period of time where he was elite, maybe elite bordering in Pittsburgh, but this is James Conner. If you're a fantasy owner, he is much higher than this because he is a touchdown merchant. I mean, if we're talking inside the 3-yard line, I want James Conner as like my number 1 running back. He's awesome right at the goal line, but he doesn't offer a lot outside of that. He's not, I wouldn't necessarily call him a pure downhill runner like I talked about Foreman earlier. James Conner has a little more ability to, bounce off the guards to the opposite side, even play outside the tackles. And he was a really good pass blocker in Pittsburgh when he was playing with old Big Ben, where they really needed a pass blocking running back. But he's old. Honestly, I think Arizona is going to replace him soon. So this is a reason he, belongs on the tier. Talked about in the QB video. If NFL scouts and GMs are leaning one way, I'm not going to pretend like I'm smarter than them every time. It's clear that Arizona is looking to move on from James Conner after this year. So by definition, that's got to be replaceable for me. Again, you're a fantasy owner. I don't think he's a bad player to get on your team. This Arizona team is going to run the ball a lot, especially if Kyler is shut down for the whole year. He's going to be shut down to start the year. So, stats wise, he might come out of this year looking pretty good, but I think this could really be anybody doing it. Great story. Loved him at Pitt, a cancer survivor, and incredible story. Great guy. But just based off the pure skill I expect to see this year, it's going to be replaceable. Now let's talk rotational. I mean, pretty much any NFL running back is rotational just on, the games we've seen so far. But I think these guys are a step above replaceable. These are guys I think, are going to be, starting guys on their team, and we might see some shifts later in the season. So I have a little more faith in these guys. Let's talk about J.K. Dobbins first, if I can find him. J.K. Dobbins is another guy like Javonte Williams who's had to deal with some injuries, and that's really slowed down his career. But why I like him a little bit more is because Baltimore has proven they can kind of get any running back to that 1,000 yards range. I mean, when you have Lamar Jackson at quarterback who, this offseason, it looked gloomy, but they got him back on a huge deal. They're a running threat team. I mean, they don't run it like a college read option by any means, but when you have a quarterback that's so electric and so, multi-dimensional in the backfield, running backs get cleared up lanes all the time. Baltimore prides themselves on having a pretty good O-line every year. Even on paper, I don't love it every year, but they always perform, at least in the run game. I think J.K. Dobbins is going to reap the benefits of that. I think he's the lowest guy in my rotational tier. He could be replaced. He has been replaced through injury, but I think just based on the scheme alone, he's going to find success, and there's going to be no need to replace him. Next up, this is kind of a weird one. I don't love that this guy even has to be on the list, but it's going to be Jamal Williams. No disrespect to Jamal Williams. He was an incredible running back last year. He deserves to be a starter on a team, but we saw him move to New Orleans this offseason, and that's Alvin Kamara's spot to lose, and he lost it. Honestly, just based off the field stuff, he's going to be suspended for the first couple of the games of the season. At least that's what I'm suspecting right now. We don't have full news on that as I'm recording this, but in my head, this is going to be Jamal Williams starting the season. And man, talking about a guy who's good at the goal line, that would be him in bunches. I mean, we saw his success in Green Bay in the past, but we really saw it last year in Detroit. He led the league in rushing touchdowns. I mean, that's incredible. And I think the Saints are going to be happy to have a guy like him. But if you're the Saints, you built that whole offense around Alvin Kamara being so awesome, which he has been. When we're talking about on the field, I'm a big supporter of Alvin Kamara. I think he's been awesome. But Jamal Williams is going to have to fill in that hole, and he's not the same sort of back Kamara is. So I'm worried about this Saints team. I was already worried with Derrick Carr. I'm really worried about it, thinking about Kamara not being on the field. So it's going to be interesting. But I have respect for Jamal Williams. He's rotational. He deserves to get snaps, the most snaps out of any running back on his team on any given year. But he's going to be playing in a Saints offense where I don't trust a whole lot. Next up, let's go to another guy that's kind of in a weird spot. It's Miles Sanders. He's going to be going to Carolina, and it's going to be an interesting situation. I didn't love him last year in Philly. They kind of were moving him around. They had Scott, Gainwell, all these guys, and he couldn't really find a spot for himself, it feels like. And it's weird because he's a talented running back. We know he's a talented running back, but I feel like he was kind of scrapping around for snaps over there. So he goes to Carolina, obviously a team that's moved on from McCaffrey, and he has a brand new role. He gets to kind of be that guy that gets the ball every play, especially when you have a rookie quarterback like Bryce Young. It's going to be getting a lot of opportunities. I just don't love what I've seen so far. So I'm going to say rotational. I think he's in a really good situation, which for running backs is a huge deal. You need to be in the best situation possible to succeed. So I think there's some juice there. I think we could see something. Next up, we're going to move on to Dameon Pierce. Dameon Pierce was super fun to watch last year. He's a big running back, puts the head down, knocks people off his shoulder. But I actually don't love his situation. And that's nothing to be said about the Texans. I mean, the Texans suck. But CJ Stroud's also a rookie quarterback. I mean, you can only do so much with that as a running back. it's good because you're going to get the ball very often, but especially in a case like a guy like Dameon Pierce, who profiles as a guy that gets his best runs in between the guards, off the center. They're just going to jam the box on him, and he can run through a lot of guys, but if you put 6 guys on him, he has no chance. These running backs are, there's some guys that are really tough to read, and he's one of them. Maybe he was just 1-year wonder who got some rookie juice, or maybe this guy is generational. I can't tell with him, so rotational feels like the safe bet for me. Next up, we're going to go to DeAndre Swift. Philadelphia obviously has changed that running back room quite a bit since last year. We saw Miles Sanders is now gone, but DeAndre Swift is a really fun running back. The Lions couldn't hold on to him because they signed Montgomery, they drafted Gibbs. There wasn't really a spot for Swift, but I think the Eagles are going to make the most of him. Once again, Eagles are a team, obviously, that made the Super Bowl this year. Incredibly talented, great QB play, great wide receiver play, great offensive line, checks all the boxes. So Swift doesn't have to go out there and be a top 5 running back. He can just be himself, the guy that he was in Detroit, and he's going to have some great numbers. I think he's going to have a great year. We're talking fantasy-wise. I like to throw a little bit of fantasy chops into this because I'm a fan. I play fantasy football. I think he's going to be a worth it get. There's going to be some guys. He's going to go late, but he's a guy that I think could be, an RB2 on a really good fantasy team, stuff like that. But he's going to be the RB1 in real life for the Eagles. And I think we'll see some juice there. I'm kind of excited for that. My last guy in the rotational tier, a guy that's kind of a little higher on my board than I think he would be on a lot of people's, it's going to be Rachaad White. Rachaad White in Tampa Bay, they are not in a good place with their quarterback position, but I would say they're in a pretty good place with their running back position. I know he's kind of a sleeper pick. Some people, think he's underground. I don't think he's underground. I think he's been showing out recently, especially last year. We saw a lot of good stuff from him. Leonard Fournette, they moved on from his contract, his ability. He's fallen off a little bit. That happens to the older big running backs. Not with Eddie Lacy. Fournette's not that big. Don't get me wrong, but point is, Rachaad White had a lot of moments to shine, and I think he's awesome. I think he's elusive. I think he gets to space. And once he gets in the open field, I don't want to tackle him. And that's a lot to be said for a guy that's really not that big. He's tough when it matters. And I think he's going to find a lot of success in Tampa Bay this year. Moving on to the rotational studs. This is a weird tier, so I'll break it down. I only have 2 guys in here. I think these guys are going to be rotational, but we're going to see a lot of juice from them going forward. I like to say the word juice. That's what I think of when I think of these running backs. Juice. They're electric. And so these guys might be rotational right now, but these are going to be like the best rotational backs, and they're only really rotational because they have a really good secondary back, paired with them. So this will make sense when I put Breece Hall here. Breece Hall, obviously coming off the injury, that's a little bit scary, but God, can this guy run? Iowa State, he was a monster. Started his career with the Jets, he was a monster. Only reason he's more of a rotational stud than everyday stud is because he's coming off the injury, and I really like Michael Carter on the Jets. He's been a performer for the last couple of years, and it feels like he's never taken a step back. He's always consistent. So, Breece Hall, he's going to be a stud. He will be that workhorse going forward. But just looking at this next year, I think it's one of those rotational guys that will be really great. And I could say a similar sentiment about, the rookie Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs, I didn't love his draft placement. I'm not the biggest fan of him. If you watch some of the old podcast videos, I didn't say the nicest stuff about him. With that being said, Detroit was the perfect spot. He couldn't have asked for anything else. The only reason he's a rotational stud, not an everyday stud, very, very similar to Breece Hall, I should say. And that's just, because they got David Montgomery on that team. The Lions, they don't care who rushes for the most yards as long as their team has an electric running game, and that's what they built up. I think Jahmyr Gibbs will be the starter technically. Who knows if he gets more snaps than Montgomery, or, what the different snaps look like for the players. But going forward, I really think he's going to be a good back if he stays in Detroit. But rotational still, Montgomery's probably going to get a very solid amount of the snaps this year. Honestly, if I had to guess, it would be 50-50-ish, but we're going to have to wait and see what happens during the season. Next up is the fun part. We get to move to the top 2 tiers. I just get to say nice things about these guys. I hate saying bad things about the running backs because it always comes back to bite you. There's going to be a guy in this replaceable tier that's going to have an amazing season, and I'm going to look stupid, but now it's time for me just to be nice, and that's the best part. So let's talk about a guy I really love to talk about because he's on my favorite team, Ramondre Stevenson. Ramondre Stevenson might be the best player on the Patriots right now, outside of maybe Matthew Judon, and that's really sad because this would put him at 16th in NFL running backs. But the good things about him is that he's a smart runner. Belichick's system works for him really well. He gets those inside outside looks where, Damian Harris in the past started really good and then kind of, started jolting a step back. He wasn't really busting out those outside runs anymore because, as you know, if you're a running back getting beat up in the middle of the field, middle of the line over and over again, you're not really getting incentivized to bust it out to the side. You're going to be tired. You're going to be gassed. And even in a rotation, if you're a workhorse like Stevenson, you expect the guy to kind of run out of steam, even later in the season. But good thing about him, he's really young. He still has a ton of steam going towards the edge, which makes him really hard to stop. Defensive tackles can't catch him in the middle of the field, and these edge rushers aren't strong enough to catch him on the outside. So there's a lot of good things to say about him. I don't love Mac Jones as his quarterback. I love Stevenson, so I think he should stay. Maybe with a different pairing, he would be even better, a little higher up on this, but he's an everyday stud. He's going to be the Patriots running back one. They don't have a lot of guys behind him that I think are going to steal many snaps from him. I think he's going to have a really good year. Next up, we'll talk about Najee Harris. Najee Harris is a super interesting one because 2 years ago, people would have put him top 5 in the NFL. Last year, guys are putting him bottom 10, bottom 5. And it's funny because I think that's well deserved. If you play bad, people are going to talk bad about you, especially if you're a running back that got drafted very high, and running backs don't last long in the NFL. I think he's going to bounce back this year. He has, a full year under his belt playing with Kenny Pickett. He has experience with the guy, and the offensive line is getting better and better. They invested in an early pick in Broderick Jones. That is awesome for Najee Harris. So, with that being said, I don't need to go too deep into this. You guys know all the awesome things about Najee Harris. He was a stud his rookie year. I think he'll go back to that form. That might be a hot take, but I think he's worth it's not even really a risk if you're the Steelers, but I think he might be one of these guys that earns a second contract. He's got a couple more years, so we can see that. But I really like him. I don't think he's as bad as some people that make this tier list would still put him bottom 10-ish. I think he's going to have a bounce back year. I have a lot of respect for him. Next up is Saquon Barkley. I hate putting him this low, but he has lost a bit of a step. He doesn't seem like he's on the same page with the Giants, considering how much he should be paid or what his role is on the team. But he's still the running back one. He's still that same guy that was the best running back in the league for a couple of years. One of the best Penn State football players of all time. So rolling Indy Lions. Shout out to my Big Ten schools. But Saquon Barkley, this might be his last year competing at a high level. With that being said, I got to respect him. I think this year he will compete at the high level, but it's tough. It's tough. This Giants team has a lot of things going for it. I don't know if they're going to continue to pay Saquon Barkley after this year. I'm pretty confident they won't. That being said, he's still got all the tools. He's an incredibly skilled running back, and he's electric to watch. I'm always rooting for Saquon. I hope he's an everyday stud. Next up, we're going to go for a guy that's really low on this list, and I hate to put him here. It's going to be Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook, recording this video on May 30th. I don't know if he's going to get cut by the Vikings. I don't know what his deal is, because he is the best running back in that room, but they can't pay him. This is what happens with the running backs. We're going to see really good guys not be able to hold a roster spot because nobody wants to pay him. We're talking about straight skill. Dalvin Cook is awesome. He's been one of the most underrated backs in the last couple of years, but I don't know if that whole contract thing is going to be looming in his head. And I realistically can't put him much higher because I don't even know if he'll play for the Vikings next year, which is absolutely ridiculous for a player this good. This only could happen in a running back tier list, but I'm interested to see what's going to happen. Maybe we're going to see some other guys, take bigger roles. If they're looking to move on from him next year, they might be ready to move that process forward sooner. He might be sitting on the bench some games. So I would hate to see that because he's so talented. But, just for those reasons alone, I feel like I can't put him much higher. Another guy in a similar position will be Aaron Jones. If we're talking about most underrated running backs in the last 5 years, he might be my first pick. He is incredible every single year, and he just gets disrespected. And it was mostly because he was playing with Aaron Rodgers. When you're on a team with a quarterback that great, sometimes you might get overshadowed. And I know Aaron Jones, especially when he was playing with Jamal Williams, he wasn't getting every snap because Jamal Williams is so good towards the goal line. It kind of screwed up Aaron Jones' numbers a lot. But if we're talking about pure runners, he's incredible. I'm excited to see what's going to happen with Jordan Love, but I don't know if they're going to pay him next year either. Him and Dalvin Cook are in similar boats. Shout out to the NFC North guys, but they're kind of on similar pages right now. I think they both have incredible talent. I just don't know if they're going to be incredibly schemed with big paydays going around the corner. I think either one of these teams might jolt for their younger running backs, and it's kind of scary if I'm one of them. I think, this is a prove it year for both of them. I trust Aaron Jones a little more than Dalvin Cook just based on what I've seen in the past, and especially Dalvin Cook's injury history. But this is a weird spot. Those are the two that I'm probably the least, knowledgeable about because it's really going to be some insider stuff. They could be workhorses because we know they have the talent, or they might get replaced like very, very soon. Let's talk about a guy that I don't think will get replaced. I think he proved himself in the last couple of years, and that's Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon, I don't know what his deal is with suspension stuff. Based on when I'm recording it, it doesn't sound like he's going to have to sit out any games, which is good for him, really good for the Bengals. But I think he's got disrespected way too often. Everybody likes to, especially in fantasy football. I'm bringing up fantasy again, but he's like a top 10-ish back every year, and he gets drafted way, way late for some reason. I think Joe Mixon is incredibly talented. I don't love him off the field. I'm not a fan of his personally, just as a player. But if we're talking talent-wise, I think this Bengals team is going to be really good, and a huge part of that is Joe Mixon. Joe Burrow isn't Joe Burr. He's not Joe Shiesty. He's not all this good stuff without Joe Mixon being a top talent every year. And he's going to need to be this year because the Bengals, to a lot of people, are the Super Bowl favorites. That's a topic for another day. But if Joe Mixon can play up to his talent level and, hopefully the off the field stuff gets figured out, he's going to be incredible. I feel like I might have even put him too low. Next up is my favorite running back in the whole league. It's Derrick Henry. I mean, if you think I put him too high, you can say that. Please tell me in the comments, but this is my guy. I think Derrick Henry is, I want to choose my words correctly. I think he's a top 3 talented running back in the league. I worry with him. Major injury last year. He's older. And he's not like one of these guys that still has great athleticism. He's a guy that gets beat up every season. It's hard for him to make it a full season because he's just getting clobbered. But good part about him is he's so much bigger than everybody else. He can dish it out too. This Titans team is really, really bad. Like really bad. And I think that might screw up his numbers quite a bit. Every team, even when Tannehill was playing good for the Titans, teams would load up the box to stop Derrick Henry. But I think we might see it more than ever now. I hope he can keep his step. I'm nervous that he lost a step a little bit with that injury, which is why I don't have him in like my top 5 or my top 3, like how talented I think he is. But this is going to be a big year, big prove it year for Derrick Henry. Like when he's at his best, he's an NFL MVP. But, he's got to be on the field to show that. So it's going to be an interesting year nonetheless. Next up is a guy that finally gets to start. It's about time. It's Tony Pollard. You guys have seen Tony Pollard play a lot. Obviously, him and Zeke were a huge duo in Dallas for the last couple of years. But Zeke is out. He's a free agent now. I don't know if he's going to get picked up before the season starts. Tony Pollard is that guy. I'm a big Tony Pollard fan over here. I think he's an electric runner. I think he's really smart. I think that's the first thing with Tony Pollard. I mean, we talk about Le'Veon Bell historically being one of those smart running backs. He's patient in the backfield. He was high as hell, but patient. Tony Pollard, he's just Le'Veon Bell without the weed sometimes. I mean, that's very high praise, but he's patient. He's smart. And in the open field, he is much faster than you might think. I mean, you look at his 40 time and you may not be blown off the shelves, but you see him run in game, full pads, open field. I don't know who's catching him sometimes. I like Tony Pollard quite a bit, and he's going to be the last guy in the everyday studs tier. Workhorses, it's a little weird. Some of these guys I feel like I don't even have to say anything about, but I'm going to try to give you analysis for everybody. But these guys right at the bottom, there's a lot of different types of guys, but I think these are going to be the workhorses going into next year. First guy I'm going to take off the board is going to be Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker was amazing as a rookie last year in Seattle, and I don't see why he's going to stop now. I think he's going to have a second year that rivals his first year, if not better. I mean, there's no reason. There haven't been any major changes in Seattle in the offensive running game front, which worry me. I actually think another year under that team's belt is going to make them maybe not record-wise better. I don't know how I feel like Seattle's going to do next year, but I think their rushing game is going to be awesome. And I think Kenneth Walker is that dude. He was unstoppable in college and then comes into the NFL, and the transition was seamless. Even while fighting through some injury, he was awesome. So he's going to be a workhorse. I think he's going to be a consensus top 5 running back in the league going forward. I mean, who knows? Once again, high praise. Next guy is Jonathan Taylor. Super, super, super disappointing last year, but we've seen him at his best. That's an offensive player of the year type of guy. And I think he can bounce back to that. So I don't think he's going to be number 1 in the NFL like he was consensusly a couple years ago, but definitely top 7, which like we have here, top 6, put him in the 6th spot. This Colts team, is weird. Anthony Richardson or Gardner Minshew, whoever they start to start the season, is going to have a tall task on their hands, but having a guy like Jonathan Taylor next to them is going to make it much, much easier. I don't have a ton to say about him. Everything that's already been said about him, he's a tough runner. I think he's also very smart. He's electric on the outside. All the great things you could say about running backs. Good pass blocker. He checks all the boxes. He's a workhorse guy. I think he'll bounce back to that. I don't think he's fallen off. I think he still has an opportunity to show who he is. And don't sleep on him too early. I mean, just because he had a bad year last year doesn't mean that he's out of the league entirely. Like, he's going to bounce back. I really believe that. Next up, let's talk Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler, obviously the fantasy demon, probably the best player in fantasy every year in the last couple of years. But as a running back himself, he kind of has weird moments. We saw, especially last year in the playoff game with the Jaguars, he can't really will himself to first downs all the time. What makes him so great is he's a receiving threat. And we saw Justin Herbert at Oregon, just throwing bubble screens and halfback slip screens every single play. Eckler's the perfect guy for that. The Chargers have a much more advanced scheme, don't get me wrong. They have stud receivers, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, soon to be Quentin Johnston. They have a great passing game, but doesn't hurt for a guy like Justin Herbert who loves throwing a little screen that Eckler's the best at taking those screens at any running back on this list. So his receiving game automatically puts him to the top. He's like Danny Woodhead on crack. The Chargers love Danny Woodhead too. So the Patriots, shout out. But Austin Eckler is so much more than that. I hope he can progress as, I guess a traditional running back, in between the guards, going downhill, making a guy miss, getting 5 yards. He's not really that guy. But I think he still has time. I know that he's kind of weird with his contract right now. The Chargers gave him a big bonus to keep him. So I think this is the year where he has to prove it. If he wants that big contract, he has to do it this year. And I think he will. I'm a fan of his as well. I got his jersey. Shout out to Austin Eckler. Next up is going to be Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne is just, I think he's going to take a big step this year. I've said this about Trevor Lawrence as well. I had him very high on my list. I have high praise for him, but it's really a projection more than anything. Last year, we saw some flashes, rookie year. We've seen some good stuff. But I really think this is the year where he takes the big step up. I loved him at Clemson, obviously. Him and Trevor Lawrence, the Clemson guys, they brought them both over to Jacksonville. And it's time for Travis Etienne to show what he's worth. It's much higher than some people are going to put him, but purely I think he is such a fun running back to watch. He's electric. And I love what Jacksonville is cooking. So I kind of just have to pay respects over there. Next up, I'm actually going to take his back because I realize I made a mistake. And I'm going to alleviate all your fears right now. I do not have Bijan Robinson this high without seeing him take an NFL snap. Where I do have him, though, is in between some other everyday studs I've talked about before. So I'm going to throw you guys for a loop a little bit here. That wasn't intentional. Sorry about that, guys. But I think I'll slide him in right after Joe Mixon, right in front of Aaron Jones. And I'll just give you quick little synopsis on that. I can't put him over Joe Mixon because Joe Mixon is very established, but compared to Aaron Jones and Dalvin Cook, he has a much more established role. Atlanta's really invested in him. I mean, they're building the whole team around him. And I know everybody else knows that it's going to be a rough season for Atlanta. They might be one of the worst teams in the league. But Bijan Robinson was such a stud at Texas. And the biggest thing why these rookies show out and are so good right away most of the time, they have fresh legs. Bijan Robinson, he's going to take a toll this year, I'm sure, but he has no gas, used. His tires are completely fresh. All that, car related stuff you could say about running backs. I think he's going to be fresh. He's going to be incredible this year. He is so fun to watch. That Atlanta team drafting him made them, a team I was never going to watch this year, to be honest, to an electric team that I'm kind of excited to see. So, don't worry. He's not this high. He's not higher than a guy like Eckler or Jonathan Taylor. My fault on that. But now he's in a spot, and we have the top three. Top three is tough. I mean, just looking at paper, we have Nick Chubb, who has been the most underrated running back pretty much every single year since he's been in the league. He's absolutely incredible. Shout out to Georgia. Josh Jacobs, he was the leading rusher in the NFL last year. He got disrespected for so long, and now he's finally starting to get some praise. And then we have Christian McCaffrey. I mean, what do you say about Christian McCaffrey? He's just an incredible runner. He's an incredible receiver. He can pass block. He's clutch. He fits every scheme. You can build a scheme around him. You can slide into your scheme you already have, like you did in San Francisco. So, enough talking about it. I'm gonna put Josh Jacobs third. I know he was the leading rusher last year, but just talent wise, he doesn't stack up with these other two. But when it comes to finding the hole, he does it. You can't lead the NFL in rushing if you don't have an incredible ability to find space in the field, and that's what he did. I think he's gonna have another great year. I know running backs, they could always take a step back, and I worry about that with him. But I think he's gonna be awesome again. I think the Raiders are gonna have to respect him and give him top tier money. Next up, let's get climatic. Is it going to be Chubb? Is it going to be McCaffrey? I know you saw McCaffrey on the thumbnail. Is he still the best? That's the question you might have going into this, especially if you're a 49ers fan. Nick Chubb, is someone on the internet finally going to give him respect and put him number one when, hey, he might deserve it? That's not going to be me, and I feel so bad about it because I love Nick Chubb. I might be one of his biggest fans. He is the full package at running back. If you could build a running back on your team and you gave me Nick Chubb out of anybody in the league, I would be so happy. This Cleveland team, it's going to be interesting to watch. Deshaun Watson finally got that weird last season under his belt. He's going to be fully ready with the whole offseason behind him for this year. And Nick Chubb is his officer in command. This is the guy that you want if you're Deshaun Watson. And, maybe you're a little nervous about your receiving threats. You're a little nervous about playing in Cleveland, whatever. You're happy you have a guy like him. But as I'm going to put him on the board right now, Christian McCaffrey does everything you could possibly want. I just said that about Nick Chubb, but Christian McCaffrey does it better. And it's simply that. He's on a San Francisco team last year that they didn't have a quarterback. Trey Lance is hurt. Garoppolo's hurt. Brock Purdy's playing out of his mind for what anybody might have expected from him. But the reason Brock Purdy got to play so well is because Christian McCaffrey, who got traded at the trade deadline, which is not something that ever happens in the NFL. Starters rarely get traded at the NFL trade deadline ever. But Carolina moved on from him. Now he's a 49er, and we saw last year. How are you going to stop him? How? Carolina, shout out Kyle Shanahan. They had Mike McDaniel, who's a stud. They have fresh faces in the offensive room, but it feels like the trade never slows down. And Christian McCaffrey is the perfect player you bring into that. He's the hometown kid. He's a stud. He showed out in Carolina. He was the only bright spot on that team for the last couple of years. Now he's competing in San Francisco, which is great for him. And with that being said, I think we finished up my tier list. I know I might have rambled on a little bit. The running backs can get weird. So if my takes and my research wasn't as good as you may have expected, please leave me comments and ask questions. I'll take criticism. I'll take happy comments too if you guys want to be nice. But if you have any deeper questions about maybe some running backs that weren't on the board, or some running backs that hey, you might not think are rotational, you might not think they're everyday studs, let me know. Let's have a discourse in the comments, and I love to talk about it. With that being said, that's going to wrap up the video. Please check out any other video you find on this channel. Check out my QB tier list. Check out the Instagram at The Next Man Up Sports, and check out our podcast. It's coming out on Thursday, every Thursday. Love you, appreciate you guys, and have a great rest of your day.